Political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable and to give an appearance of solidity to pure win. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. It's always a pleasure to be on the show after a lapse of nearly 3 weeks. It's good to be back and moderating one of the most popular as well as the only English political debate program in Sri Lanka. 3 decades of conflict, and for the shortest memories known to mankind and people who will never learn from their mistakes, you know who to contact, the state of Sri Lanka. However, tonight our topic of discussion is going to revolve around 2 words. That's the political climate in the country. To talk about all this and more, we've invited 4 guests to our studios this evening as well as usual. Joining us this evening on the show is former Member of Parliament of the People's Alliance, Mr. Kesarala Gunasekara. Nice to have you on the show, Mr. Gunasekara. Also joining us tonight on the show is the very vocal Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe, former Member of Parliament of the United People's Freedom Alliance. Nice to have you on the show as well after many months. All joining us this evening is Mr. Govind Dayasri.
Hi.
Nice to see you back on the show, Mr. Dayasri. Where did your latest travel take you this time around?
Let me speak a minute or two on that later on. It's Indonesia, sir.
Indonesia. Nice to have you back on the show, Mr. Dayasri. Also joining us this evening is CEO of the Shippers Academy of Colombo, Mr. Rohan Maskora. Nice to have you on the show. Rohan, it's always a pleasure to have someone of your caliber speaking to our audience this evening. So let's start off tonight's show with Mr. Kesarala Gunasekara, former Member of Parliament of the People's Alliance. Mr. Gunasekara, an election just concluded. We saw one of the all-important local government elections concluding. Where are we standing now? What's next? And what can we expect in the near future?
It's so difficult to say. In fact, last time when I came here, you asked me the same question about the elections, and I categorically said that holding of the elections is not a difficult task, but the declaration of results is going to be very difficult, and that is exactly what happened.
In your opinion, in your opinion, Mr. Gunasekara, right now there is a deadlock in many councils. Let's take a look at the Devila Mountain Municipal Council, where the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna has garnered the same number of seats just as the United National Party. What's going to happen next? This is coming from your constituency, where you also contested. What's happening next as far as these councils are concerned?
Well, they'll have to come into an agreement as to who is going to be the mayor and as well as the deputy mayor. Come into an arrangement and then go for the first meeting. That's what I feel is the correct thing to do.
So when will this first meeting really happen?
It all depends, because it has to be first gazetted. Once it is constituted, then the Commission of Local Government will have to sit at the first meeting. Each council in the Western Province, she will have to sit, she will have to decide as to what the dates are going to be. Maybe 2 meetings per day, except on that basis only it will take place.
Mr. Gunasekara, I just want to take you back to the election date and the voting that took place. Were you in any way surprised with the election outcome this time around?
Yes, the percentage-wise, yes, I was surprised. I knew that they would take away a fair amount of our votes, but I never expected the quantum or the magnitude.
What is the reason behind this?
Well, several reasons. I feel that the 8th January operation did not bring in the desired results. You know, people wanted so many things done. Whether it was short-term or long-term, they wanted certain actions, but some of them did not take place. When I say some of them, the important things did not take place. Bringing wrongdoers to book did not take place. The fertilizer issue was a mess. The glyphosate issue was a wrong decision. Things like that contributed to some degree, or a great degree, I would say.
Mr. Gunasekara, let's talk about the issues that you brought out, the fertilizer matter. Let's take a look at the Devila Mountain Municipal Council. You don't have people using fertilizer per se.
No.
But what really mattered to them was not bringing those responsible to book. Did you find it difficult as an individual who went on campaigns to press on the government's vision to the people?
No, I realized
rejected?
I realized that when I went campaigning, because I went in that particular ward, I went from house to house, and I realized that that going was tough. In fact, I communicated that as well to the party. But that is that had to be expected. I feel if the party did not expect that, that's a big problem.
Sri Lankans have really a very short memory, isn't it, Mr. Gunasekara?
To a certain degree, I would say.
How can we overcome it?
No, the question is this: if once you make promises, you must understand that you must work or ensure that those promises are met. And some of those promises were pertaining to bringing wrongdoers to book, which was very crucial, I thought. And practically the entire country was wanting that to take place. But it did not happen. It turned the other way around. Whereas the other side kept on pushing, saying, look here, this is fundamentally political victimization. And they were gaining ground on political, which is not the case, definitely. But they were gaining ground. So that's the fault of the government.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kesaralal Gunasekara, former Member of Parliament of the People's Alliance. I now move my attention to Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe, a former Member of Parliament as well as the former leader of the Liberal Party of Sri Lanka. He was a nationalist MP of the United People's Freedom Alliance. Professor, what transpired over the last few weeks in Sri Lanka, in particularly after the elections, saw somewhat of a rejection of the government's vision and the policies. How can the government correct itself, at least now? Can they do it? Is it too late for them to do this?
I rather suspect it is too late because, 3 years have gone of the president's term, and very often a president becomes a lame duck. But I would say very strongly that you're right in saying the people felt a great disappointment. But I wouldn't agree that the country at large was concerned about bringing wrongdoers to book. I think the country wanted the wrongdoing to stop. The excesses, the corruption, the authoritarianism had to stop. But I think it did become clear that the government, far from implementing anything positive in its agenda, in its manifesto, completely ignored that manifesto and instead embarked on activities that didn't take account of the reality in the country. The reality is that Mahinda Rajapaksa was a popular leader. He won the war, which had oppressed us for a very long time, but in the last few years of his government, a lot of wrong things happened, and the people wanted a change. But when it turned into what looked like revenge, and rather petty revenge, I think people just thought, but where's the positives? You don't vote for negatives. You vote for a new beginning. And nothing happened. A rational cabinet which was promised, that didn't happen. The right to information came in a truncated form. The audit bill, which would have actually instituted things. And of course, when the pledge to reduce corruption was immediately followed by the central bank bond scam, and there is no one who doesn't think that that was outrageous, but whomever you blame for it, it became obvious that this government was a government of liars. And that's very sad. And I also think the revenge, I just spoke last week, I was very glad I did it, to a permanent secretary who was really treated appallingly. This was Mr. Ranawaka, who was a very efficient and able permanent secretary. But, he may have, under political pressure, done things he shouldn't have. But, to try and put him into jail. I got his telephone number from people who'd worked in his ministry. And they have been horrified. And the last thing that someone told me was, "Satayakwa thamba karapu nathi minihek." He had a wonderful reputation for honesty and integrity. And when people like that are persecuted, the whole impression is this is not concerned about the right thing, it's a concern about revenge. And if you can't get people whom you claim did all the things wrong, that some poor public servant paralyzes the civil service.
Professor, you've always come on the show and said that President Mahinda Rajapaksa's second term of office was riddled with corruption, and you said because of this reason you did support President Maithripala Sirisena. Where do you stand now in this whole equation?
Well, I think President Maithripala Sirisena made a big mistake in July of that year when he undermined the campaign of the UPFA. As I said at the time, don't forget Maithripala Sirisena gave Mahinda Rajapaksa nomination. And having seen the way the UNP-dominated government had worked for the previous 6 months, although I had been in agreement with the original decision to appoint Ranil Wickremesinghe, I said right through that campaign, what we wanted was an SLFP-led government, Maithripala Sirisena as president, because he was elected for 5 years, but an SLFP-oriented government, and I absolutely believe that Mahinda Rajapaksa, I don't think he should have been Prime Minister, but I think that if the SLFP or the UPFA had got a plurality, they could have discussed it, and so long as the Prime Minister was acceptable, I think someone else could have served. But that would have been infinitely preferable to what we have now, which is a president who is very weak, but I think has ideals and would like to move in the right direction, completely stymied and surrounded by crooks, whose vision is completely different from his.
Thank you very much.
So I think it's a pity that that didn't happen in August 2015.
Thank you very much, Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe, Member of Parliament of the United People's Freedom Alliance. I now move my attention to a senior attorney at law, Mr. Govind Dayasri. Mr. Dayasri, we've seen 3 cabinet reshuffles in just 3 years. Consistent policy is important to any country to move forward. The recent cabinet reshuffle is viewed by many as a change of hands. It's like you change the pack of cards, but the jokers still remain in the pack, unfortunately. How do you view these developments that are taking place in Sri Lanka right now?
To me, most of it is cosmetic. To me, most of it is just timely to get over immediate problems, no far thinking, no outreach, no long-term planning. This is all consequent to an election. Now, if you look at this election, to me, one thing is very clear. People have not voted for any person in particular. I do not think, though Mahinda Rajapaksa got a thundering majority, people voted for him. People wanted a change. That change never came, but they wanted to teach the government a good lesson. They want to give it a beating of their lives, and they got it. So much so, President Sirisena couldn't win his home province, district. He lost it. Ranil Wickremesinghe is completely out of the reckoning. I mean, he is today surviving because America and India wants him in place, so that you can get on with India and US. Remember, they were the 2 main parties that opposed terrorism in this country, who gave terrorism a lift up in the minds of the people. I don't say they did it, but they did it, in the minds of the people it is so. And people will never excuse Ranil Wickremesinghe and Mr. Sirisena, who went into a silent mode immediately after the election and is now making noise, because they know they have the sustenance of 2 major powers behind them. So, but my thinking is, certainly Mahinda Rajapaksa was voted out because of corruption. He was a very good president up to 2005, as long as till he completed terrorism. It's the people who spoiled him by calling him all kinds of names like the Maharaja and all kinds of weird names that made him feel that a small man who it got into his head, and he overdid it and he got crippled. Now, people, to me, don't like corruption. Now, I would say, look, corruption is something that has got very much wedded to the Sri Lankan society. So had it been in Indonesia, where I just returned from, their corruption is endemic. But then comes a man of the blues, man with no party. His only supporter was the last Sukarno government's, his daughter, Megawati, who put him in place. And today, he's one of the most popular people because of one reason. He's not corrupt, and more so, his family is not known to be corrupt. They are dealing in old business, the same business that is turning old furniture. They are doing well. they got international orders, they make enough money, they use their own cars, even the family doesn't use a public transport, they use their own private vehicles, they don't use public vehicles. So that people know that when they build a road from X to Y distance, that money goes totally into the project. So he has created an image, and that image is growing. So much so, at the very beginning, the only people who opposed him were those extremist Muslims. Now they have also rallied round, they realize a good man is there. So Sri Lanka also, I think, has that misfortune. Someday, somebody is going to emerge in this society. He may not have a party, he may not have a name, but he was just a small governor in a province. But he had a reputation, and that reputation got enhanced over the years, and today he's holding a key position. And he's he's beloved of the people, and people trust him, people trust more his family. So
what lessons, Ms. Dayasri, we can learn from the Indonesian experience?
I won't say Indonesian, even Philippines. They've got better men. They've got men who have got the guts to tell Trump where he gets off. He has the guts to tell people that people who are dealing in drugs, people who are dealing in all kinds of, will be shot dead. I mean, you need law and order in this country, and there's no law and order because both Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe and Mr. Sirisena are dead ducks. And what is worse is Mr. Sirisena, remember, has got a cabinet full of rejected SLFPs. They got rejected in 2005. They joined hands with the UNP. You think in 2020 they are going to be elected? So he's going to be weaker. He knows he's a one-term man. He knows his time is out. Ranil Wickremesinghe is living on borrowed time. Even from within the party there will be no. Mahinda Rajapaksa is known to be corrupt. He's got to answer those allegations. So Sri Lanka is in a bad way, but Sri Lanka has a way of winning. From a bad situation, we come on top. Always we did that. We overcame terrorism, mind you. So I think we'll do it again, and we have to do it. Somebody has to emerge. Some young man has to emerge, who totally technocrat, educated, bright, but without politics, without
Thank you very
ambition.
much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Over to you.
Senior Attorney at Law, Mr. Govind Dayasri. I now move my attention to Rohan Maskoral, the CEO of the Shippers Academy of Colombo. Rohan, marketing. You've been on the show. You've expressed your sentiments very assertively. You've said that this government has done good things, but they failed miserably when it comes to marketing what they've done. And this was very clearly evident, isn't it, at the last held local government elections? Your time starts now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I don't know how they communicate. They do not communicate to the masses of this country. They feel that the masses should understand what they are doing. That's a perception that I get when I talk to government. They think that things will fall into place and that people will understand. But when you are putting certain fundamentals right, it takes time to get results. Of course, things like the bond scam have taken the negative side of it, but the positive sides, like from the business side, getting the GSP plus, working towards FTAs, opening up for more free trade, things like that, I mean, those will take long time to bring in results. But at the same time, we must realize that this is still a poor country, and people are finding it difficult to eat a particular meal for a day. In a situation like that, if you don't communicate to the people and tell them what exactly the government is doing, they will be quite keen to go to somebody who talks more popular stuff and keep them entertained for the short term, which I think saw the election results very clearly, in my opinion. That's what, and I've been telling my friends in the government that they don't tell what's happening, because I've been working with, for example, the National Export Strategy, which has come out pretty well. And now again the implementation is delayed. For example, the budget 2018, which was proposed in November, I have hardly seen anything coming into action. Again, I don't know who's behind it blocking, or some of the gazettes, the legal processes. We thought that particular budget was a pretty good budget from the business point of view. But nothing is happening again. So another 2 years they have to govern before the big elections come, but interim there are going to be more elections for provincial councils. which means I am of course personally worried that the economic focus is going to go out and the political focus is going to play in, and we as a country will still not grow as fast as we would like to, whereas our neighbors like India, Bangladesh are going at 7.5% growth. We are struggling to get into 5%. So these are worrying factors, and very clearly very poor for communicators and marketeers of products.
Rohan, you were in India just a couple of weeks ago before your visit to Australia. When you look at the development that is taking place in India, don't you feel sorry for little Sri Lanka? We were just reeling with a 3-decade-old conflict. We're just facing riots now in Sri Lanka. Where are we really heading right now? Do we know where we want to go? Do we have a strategy to move forward? What exactly is happening?
I don't think the vision is driven by people from the cabinet. Many of them I don't think understand even the vision that, or the twice they have issued various economic visions. I don't see a lot of ministers understanding the vision of the country where it should be. Yes, India is very focused, even if they such a big population and diverse country. Each time you go there, you see changes happening, and its doing business index just jumped 30 points positive last year. So yes, even Bangladesh is same. I travel a lot there. Things are changing to the positive direction. But here you mentioned about 3 cabinet reshuffles. So obviously there's a problem. If you have 3 cabinet reshuffles, how can we go to a ministry and expect something to happen? Because a day you go to that ministry and 1 year down the line, the minister changes. Nothing is continuous. So the policy in terms of reforms, nothing happens. So we're just going a slow motion kind of a situation, and that's not good for economic activity at all.
Another cabinet reshuffle is due, you're aware,
yes,
right?
I heard so, and I'm so disappointed. I mean, end of the day, personally, I'm not going to get affected. I am able, and I have rest of the world to look at. But what about the poorest of the poor of this country and their middle class people? How can they look at economic expansion if we don't have political and policy stability? People of this country are going to suffer. And I think I told one of your media men recently that it's not only the young, it's the old who are going to suffer, because their old age is not going to be very rosy if this kind of political management is continued in this country.
Thank you very much, Rohan Maskorala, CEO of the Shippers Academy of Colombo. I open the floor for questions from our journalists. On to my immediate left is Chaturanga Haporachi, who was appointed as Assistant Manager of English News just today. Congratulations to you, Chaturanga. And also on to my far left is Sharda Fernand, who is also an Assistant Manager of the News. So let's start off with the two. Let's start off with the lady today.
Thank you, Shamil. My first question is to Mr. Maskorala. Now, we know that economic growth has been hovering around, say, between 4 and 5% ever since the separatist war, and soon after the war we saw a spike. Now again we are back to 4.3%. The IMF said yesterday that economy will grow around 4.4%. Looking back at the unrest we saw a couple of weeks back, what is the economic cost of these activities?
Well, I can't give you a number, but I would say it's huge. In terms of some sectors, probably we went back 5 years, like tourism and all the perception that we built around the world within seconds. It's very, very huge. It would affect the trishaw driver to the smallest boutique, because tourism was something that was promising, growing at 15-20%. Now suddenly we get this negative news out of the country. I don't know, the repercussions are going to be quite bad in the medium term, unless we have a huge campaign to market ourselves out of it, which we are again not very capable, which we have not done in the past. What was happening in the past was something natural growth and the private sector led push. Even they are in a difficult situation because our communication to the world also is very negative, and even this current Facebook and other things blockade, which is overdone, is again will probably have a negative effect. In fact, when the government initially came up with this blockade, I thought for 72 hours it's reasonable enough, but I told them, don't make a mockery out of it. It will backfire on yourself within 48 hours or 72 hours. And it seems like people are now getting unhappy about what's happening, because 90%, majority of the people are good people, or 95%. if you are giving in to 5% of people in this way, if the 95% can't put up positive news on Facebook and you can't catch the 5% or 2% that is doing the wrong thing, something wrong with governance again. So it's a short-term measure, so we need to get those things also out, because they will also have negative implications to the economy. A lot of people do digital marketing today, even I use digital platforms to market my products. I am totally stuck. So exact economic numbers, Charita, I can't give you, but I can tell you it's huge, and everybody in this country, from the top businessman to the smallest businessman to the trishaw driver, is going to suffer because of this incident that happened in this country, and it was totally unwanted. I am sad. I am somewhat to say that we have failed to build our Sri Lankan identity after 9 years of a terrible war, which my young age, whole of my young age, we sacrificed. We were living in fear. And I don't want to happen that to the future generation, nor to myself. I only can say I'm sorry for my country, and I just have hope only that these politicians will put something right together to see the larger vision. This is not being seen anywhere in other parts of the world at this level. I mean, Sri Lankan politics have gone to such a rotten level. I don't know whether we can lift it up. I'm in a bit of a mixed feelings rather than giving you a lot of positive signals, Charita.
Professor Vijay Singh, now why do you think this kind of unrest or riots, why do we see it in different intervals? Is it because the government in power has miserably failed to uphold rule of law, or is it a problem with perceptions, or is there a bigger problem with regard to the majority rural communities where they are not empowered in economic activities, so they can't, compete, or they can't stomach another community prospering? Is there a bigger problem?
Well, I think there are two general issues, but I would hasten to add that anything one says can only be part of the picture, because this requires much more study. I think what has happened in the last few days has also indicated that racist concepts are really held only by very few people. The vast majority of people actually were shocked by what happened and came forward to help in a big way. And I think it's very, very clear that the viciousness, if you like, was planned and instigated by a very few people. But let us also go further. I think there's a general culture of revenge and refusal to accept that, one may have lost a battle. So even if you take the start, reports suggest that it was triggered by an attack on a bus driver by youngsters who were a bit resentful that they hadn't been able to overtake him. And that sort of rage about such trivial incidents, such determination to paligan, as it were, is really rather bad. Now, as you know, there are Jataka stories about this, how you start with, I'm going to beat you up for what you did to me. And then in the next verse you beat up somebody and their children and their families, and it gets worse and worse. Now that whole culture needs to stop. And I think it requires not only more education, but more example. Gomin just mentioned the example of an honest leader. And it's really so sad that we don't have that as a strong example in this country. And we also don't have the concept of a leader who is not anxious to beat people up. The whole culture for the last 2 years has been revengeful. I still remember my uncle many years ago talking about how Jaya Jayawardena was going to destroy this country because he was not a generous personality. And I remember this uncle, Mr. Lakshman Wickramasinghe, talking about how this was in contrast to, let's say, Dudley Senanayake or Mr. Bandaranayake, who he said were full of generosity. They may have had ideas that other people would disagree with and so on. But this whole culture of revenge was really entrenched in 1977. Now, I'm not saying that it didn't happen before. I think there were post-election violence even under the previous government. But the whole business of screwing your opponents as tightly as possible started then and it continued. And I think what happened in 2015 was really so sad, because there was so much hope for moving forward and nothing moved. But instead it was get them. And I suppose you can't blame the young people of this country for following that. I also think it's particularly important to try and address some of the root causes, the need for making sure that youngsters understand and work with each other. I was quite sad the other day that Mr. Fauzi talked about amity schools, which, as you know, we started way back in 2001 with the cabinet paper. But for Mr. Fauzi, the amity schools were about cement, putting up new buildings, spending money. But the concept behind it, when we introduced English medium, was to actually enable young people to talk to each other.
Mr. Dashri, I just want to take you back to an international example. We spoke about the disappointment of not taking action. Let's take a look at Thailand for an example. We saw a coup happening in 2007. We saw Thaksin Shinawatra being completely out of the picture. Then 2011, we saw the first female Prime Minister of Thailand coming into play with so much of pomp and pageantry, saying that she's the first female Prime Minister who can steer Thailand to the next level. However, in 2014, she had to dissolve Parliament, and 2017, they were able to nab her for the rice scheme issue that took place in Thailand. Activities have taken place quite quickly in a country like Thailand, but in Sri Lanka, there's always a slow pace. What is the reason for this, the pace
but you see,
in which things are happening?
Common line link in the sense that I think all these countries, from Indonesia to India, from Thailand to Taiwan, there's a deep need to eliminate corruption. Now you take a person like Modi, he's winning elections, he's winning areas which never came into under the BJP control. Why? People are convinced he's honest. So is it in Indonesia, so is it in Thailand, the military, so is it in the Philippines, so that there is a new breed of leaders coming forward, but not in Sri Lanka. Why? I'll give you the answer. The answer is simply because we are still living with the aged leadership who does not give up. Now, for example, Cameron left the moment Brexit lost. But will Mahinda Rajapaksa leave? Will Ranil Wickremesinghe leave? Will Sirisena leave? They all hang on. We know two dead ducks at the moment. If you can't win Polonnaruwa, go home, sir. Next 2 years, why are you remaining? Because the constitution prevents. Sri Lanka is the only country in this whole region that does not allow elections to take for 4.5 years. You've got to have the same parliamentarians oscillating around each other. Same reason. You can buy them up. You spoke of Dehiwala Mountain. I don't know what the breakdown is, but they'll shift. they are discussing. Discussion means you think of rupees and cents. So there's so much of corruption at all levels, from local authority to government. Corruption is embedded because the system prevails.
So now, are you saying that the vote that took place at the last concluded local government election is a dissent vote?
It's a dissent vote. It's a dissent vote because they felt dissent vote, and there's another aspect, economy vote. The people were very, very affected. Yes.
Mr. Gunasekara, I want to ask a question from you. Let's take a look at the topic that we were just on, the issues that happened in Kandy. And if you take a look at the local government elections, right after the local government elections, when there was a political crisis in the country, we saw the SLPP members gathering together to discuss the issue. You saw the UNP members gathering a few times, but when you take a look at the problem of the country, the whole country was facing this situation. We did not see the political authorities, the parties, the government, the opposition actually talking about it. They were taking a backward stand. Two political parties are joining together to solve their own political problems, but when it comes to a crisis in the country, you do not see the same amount of enthusiasm.
You're right. In fact, I mentioned this at another program as well. I said the amount of energy they're putting after the announcement of the election results. Some of the meetings were held at 10:30 in the night, going up and down, so many meetings after meetings. I said if that energy was diverted to the problems of this country, we wouldn't be in this position today. So it's always when it comes to an issue about the controlling of power, then they they get agitated. But when it's something else, it doesn't.
Mr. Maskoral, I want to ask you this question as well. Now, as you said, there are a lot of people who are doing businesses online. There are a lot of social media being used for businesses in the country. Now, there is no doubt about the fact that there is no policy consistency when it comes to these cabinet reshuffles, so on. But now when you look at it, now as Shamin said, there's going to be another cabinet reshuffle, and they also say that on the 23rd of March there's going to be another news about the United National Party. With all of this coming in, as a businessman and as a person who is traveling overseas representing our country for business purposes, how does international communities view our country?
That's the problem. We are not looked as a very positive location for investment. That is why FDIs are not flowing into a country that should have naturally attracted massive amount of FDIs after the war. What have we signaled to the world is continuous instability in terms of political arena, which results in policy reforms are not going to get in proper track. Now what has happened, I bring back India. India has, after Mr. Modi came into power, things have, many reforms, major reforms have been done in economic activity. The last one being some of them are not popular, in fact the last one, the GST reforms. But he went through it, and we can see that the 5-year term is going to properly go through the mechanism. But today in our country, sadly, we don't see that stability. So we probably would have been the best country that had the greatest opportunity post-war to develop this country. But sadly, politics have pulled us back, and businesses are struggling because of that. Even the local businesses are now, most of them trying to move overseas and set up their operations. Brain drain is happening. We are talking of opening up to get Sri Lankans to come back to Sri Lanka. I don't think so. It's not going to happen.
But it's a situation where Sri Lankans are going.
Still, Sri Lankans are going in big numbers to developed countries. So we are having a problem there also. All this is created by politicians.
Professor Vijay Singh, now when you take a look at this cabinet reshuffle that took place, the one more coming again, the people did not ask for a cabinet reshuffle by voting in how they voted for the local government elections. They voted for the local government, the ward that they were represented in. Rather. Now, moving forward, when you take a look at a situation like this, we saw Sunday Times article last Sunday saying that issues like the Central Expressway will be may be taken back to Minister Lakshman Kiriyalla. We saw that happening in the previous instance as well when there was a reshuffle. The finance minister was put into another different ministry, and he wanted the lotteries board with him. Things like this, how will it impact the people, and what is actually going on?
Well, I think as people of the UNP themselves said, two people, Vasant Sen Nayaka first and then Ravi Karan Nayaka. The whole thing is an absolute joke. But underlying is the simple fact, the complete contempt of Mr. Wickramasinghe for one of the most important pillars in Maithripala Sirisena's manifesto, which was a scientific cabinet. It was a cabinet based on effectiveness. But for Mr. Wickramasinghe, a cabinet is something to reward friends, to give them plums. If you have to change them for various reasons, as happened with finance and foreign affairs, you just exchange them. But as you said, allow finance to take lotteries into foreign affairs. It's just a complete joke, and it's an absolute cynical view of politics. Now, this is accompanied by, you mentioned the fact, here's a local government election. What is the message it sends? People are disappointed with government. Now, then there's a lot of agitation for some sort of change. Now, Ranil Wickremesinghe is a master craftsman at dealing with his party precisely because of its weaknesses and its desire for plums. So what does he do? He says, no, I'm going to make a massive change. And what is the massive change? Kabir Hashim and Lakshman Kiriyalla exchange portfolios. Look at those very portfolios, highways and higher education. How on earth were those two put together? Then public enterprise development. Then you had this shocking situation of where the whole Lanka board decides the CEO must go. Ranil blocks that. Why? Because the CEO is Charitarath's brother. So it's all ad hoc. Now, if you look at the whole idea of policy, again another commitment in the President's manifesto was to have an independent public service. But deliberately they kept the clause in the constitution that allows secretaries to be appointed directly by the president. Now, not only does that happen, but because secretaries are at the mercy of their ministers, you don't have independence, you don't have continuity of policy. Now, when ministers change, there's absolutely no handover. New ministers come, they don't talk to their predecessor, and they don't have a secretary who will tell them these are the policies. Now, if a new minister comes, obviously he can say, look, I'd like the policies to change. But he can't come and not even know what the existing policies are and announce new policies. So that's where there's a lot of commitment to change in the manifesto. This hasn't happened.
Ms. Ashri, when you really look at these reshuffles that are taking place, isn't it somewhat appalling? What Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe says something very correct. You know, you have the Ministry of Highways and Higher Education given to a minister who's again a very close allied, a close accomplice of the Prime Minister. And then you have an exchange of these portfolios, and you start wondering, what are they really trying to do now?
Just a game of musical chairs. But what I feel is there's something much more dangerous. There's a message going out, a message going loud and clear to the public servants. Now they are the people who finally execute. They know, and they are very politicalized animals. They look at who's coming next, because not like in the old days. Old days, public servants, my friend's father was once, Mr. Vijayasinghe, they were not bothered about what the politicians did and said. Today they live for politicians. That's something wrong with our education. I think the old public school students were much better. They didn't bend and bow like the today's central school boys. I think the mistake is a message is going out that this government is ineffective, this government is got a very short lifespan. Ranil Wickremesinghe's days are numbered, not so much Maithripala Sirisena because he's got a 4-year term, 5-year term, he'll last the 5 years, but he's a dead duck. He can't win more, he will lose Polonnaruwa next time outright. So that message,
but don't you agree that the President is at least trying to take some steps? Because you saw when the Presidential Commission of Inquiry into the bond scam was appointed, things did unfold. Now he has appointed another Presidential Commission to look into the discrepancies that took place at Lanka as well as Sri Lankan Airlines.
Undoubtedly he is trying to do a job of work, but what's the result? The people have rejected him. People from Polonnaruwa have rejected him. So my fear is, it's not him. Don't blame him. His men, whom he absorbed into his cabinet, who are they? They are today safeguarded for the very crimes that other persons are being accused. So it's a two-time policy. It's a twin policy. One set is prejudiced, the other set is safeguarded. Now that can't happen. Now my fear is the message that goes to public servants is the most dangerous message that is going out today, because they will not effectively carry out any directions of the government.
Thank you. How difficult was your task? Now you hear Professor Vijayasinghe, Mr. Dayasri as well as Rohan highlighting the lapses of the government, and you were an individual who went out there to campaign and you saw how difficult it was. Will it be more difficult at the provincial council elections that are going to be held in a few months from now if things don't change?
It will be, unless the government sits and decides course of action. They must first find out exactly what went wrong. I don't think anybody is into that. If you don't go into that, then you will make further mistakes, and as it is, I feel that they'll continue to make mistakes. That's the biggest problem the government is.
Mr. Gunasekara, you say the government has to figure out what went wrong. In your opinion, what really went wrong?
So many things, as so many people said.
Tell me a few.
Many people wanted to teach the government a lesson, not that they were against the government, but they were not happy with certain things that the government was doing. That was one. Fertilizer was another issue. Glyphosate was another issue which affected the farmers. Cost of living, a serious problem, a very serious problem, which the government did not look into. Those are the issues, and not bringing the wrongdoers to book. I always say that because you know why? I still feel that most of the places I went, they said, look here, there are allegations made against, and we realize that those allegations are right. But see what has happened. Nobody
Mr. Gunasekara, but the government did so much. They reduced the fuel prices.
I know.
They reduced the gas prices.
I know.
However, the coconut prices went up. And in any forum, what was discussed was about the coconut prices being 100 rupees. Never in the history of Sri Lanka has that been, because I remember people saying, we can at least have pulsa ball and rice and then take our lifestyle forward. But however, that was not the case. That was not even a discussion that could that an ordinary person can have.
Correct. Now, when they messed up the fertilizer issue, when they messed up the glyphosate issue, then not bringing wrongdoers into book, you have failed. And the other issue is that the government machinery with regard to marketing, getting the message across to the people that we have done so many things, did not take place.
So you agree with Rohan when he says,
of course,
marketing was
I have
very
said
bad.
this before, that we have failed miserably. There are so many good things that we have done, but we have failed. Now we say with regard to the coconut issue, there was nobody who came on television and said, look here, this is an issue pertaining to the climate, you must understand. Place the facts before the people and say, look here, this is what we have produced. You must understand, these are the produced last year and these are produced this year. What do you want us to do? There is the demand is more than the supply. So it's a demand and supply theory.
But the problem is,
did people come and tell?
The problem is, Mr. Gunasekara, if they realize that there is an issue with coconut prices, if they realize that we can't meet the demand, why not import? We imported coconut from Indonesia and then turned it back, saying that it is not conforming to our standards. What are we trying to do? No,
there has been a policy that you don't import coconut per se, because that could bring in so many other issues into the country. That's the reason why it was turned back. But the question is this: I still feel that there was a period where the coconut prices went up. You have to understand, you must explain this to the people. But on the other hand, don't forget, the vegetable prices also came down.
Who's the better marketer? Is it President Mahinda Rajapaksa, President Sirisena, or Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe?
Well, it's so difficult. It all depends on what the media does.
Thank you very much.
What the media does.
May I just add one sentence to
yes,
it, please?
Yes, I'll give you an opportunity. Yes.
I think we missed one point. That is, we didn't bring that people who are going to catch the rogues became Mr. Clean, became Mr. Dirty. And the bond scam had a tremendous impact, and much of the credit must go to the media.
Yes,
Yes, thank you, Shamil. Mr. Dasari, since you touched on the bond scam,
yes.
Now the unfortunate incidents during the last couple of weeks have kind of overshadowed some of the other important events in the country. Now, for example, no one is talking about Mr. Arjun Mahindran. He was supposed to be in the country. Then the no confidence motion against the Prime Minister. Then the situation with local government bodies. There are so many events that has sort of come to a grinding halt. And it looks like the entire nation and the government is trying to deal with the communal unrest and also miserably failing in that aspect.
Yes, Charita, very good point that you raised, because I think this system is faulty, because for 4.5 years we can't have elections. In other words, the next round of elections will be again after 5 years, because the process can be set up only 4.5 years. So the next 2.5 years we are going to be dead. And we got a Mr. Clean who's become a Mr. Dirty. We got a president who's lost his own hometown. We got ministers who are absolute scoundrels, who have been rejected by the people, by the SLFP. Do you think SLFP is going to vote for them again? There are ministers MPs who change sides. They go from every possible party. They are because Sarath Silva gave a judgment, or the Supreme Court gave a judgment during Sarath Silva's time, permitting something that the Constitution doesn't permit whatsoever. So things have been made so foul. Untying all will be difficult, but that is why we need, I think, a man who is going to be very strong on law and order.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Dasari. We need to leave it at that for the moment. We're now going for a short commercial break. It's always nice to be on the hot seat and moderating this show. So we're going for a short commercial break. When we come back, it's Face the Nation. We're talking about the current political climate in Sri Lanka. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. We will be right back. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. We start off the third round also with Mr. Kesavarao Gunasekara, former Member of Parliament of the People's Alliance. Mr. Gunasekara, there is a hitch now. The hitch, of course, is that even after contesting the recently concluded elections, now there seems to be an opportunity for individuals who lost their ward to come through the list.
Correct.
So, what is the justification here? An individual who has been rejected from his particular ward now has an opportunity to come through the list and then sit at the council, and this particular individual is rejected by the people at the end of the day. What is the justification we have?
The law provides for that. It's a law.
But is that ethical? Because we see this happening. Mr. Gudashri correctly pointed out the SLFP members who lost their seats, lost the elections, are now nationalist MPs. But how ethical is it?
Well,
is this what we want for Sri Lanka? We saw Mervyn Silva coming through like that during President Mahinda Rajapaksa's time, and we started criticizing him, saying, how can he come to the national list? This is a failed candidate.
Shamil, I must correct you on this.
Yes. Please.
This preferential system, don't ever use the term lost. You have not got the number of preference votes. You have not lost. You have got something, but you don't come to the top. That's one aspect. Suppose, don't forget one thing. There are so many areas. If you go through the election results of the 80s and the 90s, up north, some of the members who got elected to parliament carried only 24 or 25 preference votes. You had that situation. So you must understand the preferential system you can never ever call somebody saying that he has lost, because it's that he has not reached the maximum number of preference votes. It doesn't mean that you are lost.
Mr. Gunasekara, I'm going to give you a time, but I want to just quickly go to Mr. Dayasri. Do you agree with that expression?
I've heard a song called Api Okkama Rajavaru. That should apply to Mr. Gunasekara. I mean, if you have got a certain number of votes, 25, because the voting was, LTT didn't allow people to vote. If there are people who win, people who lose. But this is very simple, because even in Parliament, as you correctly said, people who have lost are today cabinet ministers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dayasri. I need to get back to Mr. Gunasekara. I'm going to give you a minute or so for this question as well. Mr. Gunasekara, some powerhouses, like individuals who we thought are going to win. I want to mention a few names. We thought Prasad Karyavasam from the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna will emerge victorious in his ward in the Havelock town city limits. We thought Azad Sali from the Sri Lanka Freedom Party will emerge victorious. However, when you see the number of candidates, it still seems that people vote for parties and not individuals.
I said that before.
And do you think in that sense that this electoral system that was introduced by the government after so much of issues is successful?
No, it all depends. The scenario did not provide for a good election. Because there were so many issues, etc., which precipitated prior to the election, and as a result, people did not go to the polling station with an open mind. They had already decided, look, we're going to teach a lesson to the government. That's partly what went wrong. Under normal circumstances, this procedure is good. Getting rid of the preferential system is ideal, but what went wrong is the quantum of female candidates that were brought in, that enlarged the whole council. Most of these councils, their addition was roughly about 25 to 30%. That's a huge number. Now we see, you take for instance Devula Mount Linear, we had 29, now it's 48. So it's a massive increase, and as a result, it's not. I don't think it's advisable to go ahead with it. I think we have to go back and revise the quantum, but not the election system. Election system is ideal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gunasekara. Professor Rajiv Jaisingha, let's...
I'm dying to come in because this is an issue on which, as you know,
yes,
we have
I'll give your time starts
very
now,
long
so I'm not
time.
going to pose a question to you. You can rebut the points brought forward by, or back the points brought forward by Mr. Gunasekara. Your time starts now.
You see, the main point about the election system is to do two things. One is to get a parliament or a council that represents proportionately the will of the people. So if 60% of the people want the UNP, 60% of the seats should be UNP. But equally, it was vital to get rid of the mad Manapa system where everyone competed against everyone else and go back to constituencies. Now those constituencies, you should vote for individuals. Now you made the point about Azad Sali and so on and so forth. The point is, under the way this government constructed this system, you can't vote for an individual. You have to vote for a party. And therefore, if you like the United National Party best, even if you think that candidate is horrible, you have to vote for him. Now, the way a mixed system works in other countries is you have two votes. You vote
two
for
ballot papers.
Individual for your constituency, so that even if you loathe the SLFP and love the UNP, but you think Azad Sali is by far the better candidate, you vote for him. I know that's an odd situation, but if that happened. But correspondingly, you cast your party vote for the UNP. So you add up the votes of the constituency and individuals get elected. But then you add up all the votes, and after you've taken all the individuals who are elected off the top, you then compensate as this system does, but this does 60-40. Secondly, I think you have to remember, and this is where I agree with Gomin, that people who got fewer preferential votes lost because they lost across the board. They were not as popular as X. But I do take the point that when you have constituency votes, two people may come very close, so that even if X, let's say your favorite example, Azad Sali, defeats Y by a small margin, Y can still get in on the party vote if the party wants to nominate him. Whereas what happened in the last thing was wrong, and Mr. Koditawako has pointed out that Jaya Jayawarden brought that in by sleight of hand to allow people to be appointed to Parliament on the list even though they weren't on the list. But in this case, I think it's acceptable. It may not be ideal, but it's acceptable.
Thank you very much, Professor Rajiv Jaisingha, former Member of Parliament, United People's Freedom Alliance. It's always nice to see you, Professor, agreeing with other panelists sometimes, once in a way at least.
Well, when you have four people, I have to agree with at least one or two.
It's
I
always
have actually
nice.
agreed in this case once with him and once with him.
There you go,
even
that's
though
what
they
I
were
said.
disagreeing violently.
That's
Sorry,
right.
may I
It's
correct?
always
Can I
nice.
agree? Can I make a point?
Yes, yes.
Which, in support of what my friend said.
Right.
You see, Mahinda Rajapaksa won the elections, the local government elections, because he had a system. He selected the more preferential areas and went into the poll those first, so that the thing snowballed. But the UNP made Sirisena made a cardinal error. Their real strength was the municipalities and the urban councils. If they held those first, and then they held central province and maybe UA, they would have come on.
But Ms. Dayasri,
No, I'm saying is that look at the voting pattern. You get Colombo, Nigambo, all the some of the Jail, UCs. The UNP won the UCs comfortably, most of them. So that the UNP should have gone into their strongholds first, like Mahinda Rajapaksa did. He first went into the areas where he was stronger. Then he could have some the two districts that they were very strong was Central Province and UA. But when they lumped the whole thing together, they lost everything.
Ms. Ash, I need to give an opportunity to Mr. Gunasekara to respond to
Yes,
that.
please.
Shamil, there is one thing, now this, what Professor Rajiv said with regard to two votes. No, I feel it's not two votes. The first is a preference sort of a vote that is given. It's not counted as, but if he wins, he gets elected as a member.
No,
but the second one is the vote.
But the
You
dual
have
ballot
two
paper
on the same ballot paper,
yeah.
you select a person, that's not a vote. But the second one is a real vote, where he votes for a party.
But Mr. Gunasekara, most of the individuals who came on the show said that the dual ballot paper is very essential in a local government election.
But not two votes. One vote. Vote is only one. Nah? Nobody can be given two votes. Only one.
So
Then the other matter,
yeah.
what Ms. Gominda Hasiri said, about that he selected, that Mahinda Rajapaksa selected good people. No. If you take the Ulama Kenya, some of the people are not even known in the political service, but they won.
Thank you very much.
I now make one quick point on that.
Very quickly.
The expansion of the numbers, because you needed more people, is completely perverse, because what should have happened and what we recommended to the committee in 2015 was that you keep the number the same, but you just combine two constituencies.
Thank you very much. So let's I'm going to pose my question to Mr. Dashri now. Mr. Dashri, the issue of people coming through the back door, even after losing their particular wards or losing an election, this seems to be not ethical in the mindset of the people. They've lost their ward, and if that's the case, how can they come and sit or be a representative in the particular council? It doesn't matter whether it's X, Y, Z or A, B, C. At the end of the day, what matters is that person is going to be a representative who's the defeated candidate. How successful is the system?
Well, it has been totally unsuccessful approved by this election, because it was Mr. Maithripala Sirisena who had to do it, because he was short of numbers. He selected people whom he knew best from the SLP, who had been rejected by the SLP in 2005. They join a party, join with the UNP hand in hand, and can they ever get anything in 2009, 2020? So that Maithripala Sirisena did it good. I mean, he has done many sensible things. I wouldn't write him off as president. He has done a good job in the limited space that he had. But he did a colossal mistake that is going to be disastrous for him in 2020, because nobody who voted rejected SLP MP is going to vote for him after seeing his performance, after seeing how he has been shielded from the accusations that are leveled against others. When they see he having thrived under his rival for whom they dislike intensely, the UNP, I think he's got a lot of dead ducks. And 2020 is an impossible year, and I think he'll be very wise to do what he said at the beginning: I'll take one term, because 2 terms is out for him, poor man.
Ms. Dashri, I beg to differ on this, because at least you see now the president taking a firm stand. We saw him taking a firm stand as far as the CCEM is concerned. He said that the CCEM should be nullified and all the matters should be referred to him first when it comes to economic management. Actually, so he's taking some firm stand.
Don't say that.
At least now.
Not now. He took firm stands even before, when Ranil Wickremesinghe wanted to continue with that gentleman who's now out of the island and not returning. He appointed a better man in Mr. Kumarasamy. He appointed a commission that went into issues that are well worth it. So don't write him off as a bad president. Write him off as a president who can't get elected, and that again he's got to blame himself.
Thank you very much.
Dead ducks. They are dead before they
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Govind Dashri, Senior Attorney at Law. I now move my attention to Rohan Maskoral, CEO of the Shippers Academy of Colombo. Rohan, I'm going to ask you a very simple question. You've heard a politician, 2 politicians, and a civil rights activist, also a constitutional lawyer, who is well celebrated, talking about Sri Lanka's future course of action. But as a citizen, how worried are you? Because we have an election that was just concluded. In a few weeks from now, the councils have to meet, and we know that most of the councils are hung. You see a deadlock between the United National Party as well as the Sri Lanka Freedom Party. You see the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna trying to raise its head again. How concerned are you as an individual, as a citizen of Sri Lanka?
Very concerned. I am glad that I am not a political analyst, and to give this merry-go-round of things that have been going in my life throughout this country. Never came happiness as such through politicians. We've struggled as youngsters as well as in the industry to get things done. It happens even today. As I said, there was a progressive budget announced, but nothing basically is coming out of it. Even the road discipline for the trishaws that was announced 3 years back, I don't see discipline in the roads. So this country lacks discipline. This country lacks ethics at many places. So the progress of the country is worrying. When you go travel out there, you see leaders giving leadership, giving policy directions, giving targets to people, giving businesses confidence. Here the business confidence is going up and down. It's like the stock market that is never really getting up there. I just, as I said to Charita, I have hope, but it's not very much of a positive hope overlooking over the next horizon. I cannot see.
So are you trying to
changes.
say, Rohan, that there is no silver lining for Sri Lanka in the next few years, the next 2 years at least?
I don't see that. I must be very honest. I don't see it the way things I look at and what I see on the media, what I see the politicians talking, the way they are acting, quite irrational for us. That doesn't help people who are in business and people who want to make progressive decisions compete globally. That position is not being created. We are only, I think if you look at our news, 90% is politics. Economy is never spoken about. People in economics are not in the picture very much. People are not explained. The ordinary people doesn't know what global economic situations are. So they are from morning till evening bombarded with politics, and it's very, very unethical politics as far as I am concerned. So these are not positive signs for a country to move forward. So we will just go along like what we are doing, 4 or 5% growth.
Very quickly, Rohan, I know you just was in Australia admitting your son to the Deakin University in Melbourne. My question to you is, did you take this decision because there seems to be no future for the education system in Sri Lanka, or is it that you wanted your son to have a good education? What was the reason?
No, I am a dual citizen. I took up the position to take a dual citizenship in 1998. I saw this coming for this country, and I think what I did was the right thing. Look at our university systems. None of them are world ranked anymore. They are not in the top 1,000. Right? So even if their private institutions are not allowed to come in, you have problems for them created. Again, politics have creeped into those also. So the future seems to be bleak for people when the world is going on the 21st century technology. Our students are left behind. So obviously they are also trying to move out. I know I work with students, I train students. They all want certifications to go abroad. Because they know out there in Singapore, all these places there is high-tech education. All these have been buried in this country because of this. From the time I told you, it's about politics.
Thank you very much.
And in 1998, I took a decision to get my dual citizenship because I saw this is not going to correct itself. And 20 years down the line, it has not corrected itself. It's worse.
Thank you very much, Rohan Maskoral, CEO of the Shippers Academy of Colombo. I open the floor for questions. Let's start off with Chaturanga.
Thank you, Sham. Question to Mr. Gominda. Now, because of the social media ban, a lot of things in the country have been swept under the carpet, if I may put it that way. We saw recently video footage of a lady wielding a gun at a public place. Then we also saw son of a prominent politician in the country being arrested for the same reason, having assaulting two youths of university while wielding a gun in the hand, a pistol. There were similar situations before the 2015 general presidential election and the general election, and the people have put those people out of position and brought these people in. But do you think, Mr. Dayasri, that through incidents like this, the people will have trust in the government and the law and order in our country? How they have handled this situation, if I may?
Let me tell you, from my personal perspective, I'm not a supporter of this government. But I'm glad that this kind of thing can be surfaces in the media. At least you see a gun-toting politician's wife. You see certain people being arrested. Something is happening which is good. But what is sad is for 2.5 years, mind you, we are going to have 3 major elections, the provincial councils, the presidential election and general election. In the next 2 years, when people don't want all those elections, it would have been fine if it was scheduled previously. over a period of time. We had to fight for this election, get this election, and then normally people vote very little at very few numbers vote at local government elections. Yeah. Large number went to register their protest. Yes. Now they will have so many elections which are very costly, which will see the same gangsters coming over and over again, because you see today, because of the LTT and the JVP, they killed the best of the politicians. What is left is the people who were the children and the sycophants. They are the people who are left, and they have been pushed into various positions, and they are able to get into the next round. Now my fear is, for 2 years we may be dead, but I am not as pessimistic as my friend. I think India, Pakistan, several countries have come out with new leadership. Sri Lanka also needs that. Remember, Trump has no party. The Indonesian man has no party. The Filipino man has no party. They came as individuals to serve the people. Their people have accepted them. They are doing a service. So is Modi. Modi's BJP was not in control in most provinces, but now they are expanding. So is Trump. Trump was neither Republican nor Democrat. So you see, there is a possibility, as a window. Let's open that window and let young people come into the forefront. Let these old politicians, whether they are in local authority or in parliament or in the presidential palace, let's move them out and get young people. I see a future in this country.
Mr. Gunasekar, a question to you on the same line. Now, we see that a lot of information is being barred because of this social media ban. Let me take another angle to it. Now, we see that a lot of people in the country are worried about especially farmers are worried about this situation where there is a lack of rain and the government is not. If you take a look at the social media now, people are talking about that issue to say that there is rain in Colombo and not rain in the proper areas that will be good for the agriculture. Do you think the government is worried about the wrong reasons? Now, as Mr. Maskorala said in the first round, the social media ban should have been lifted 72 hours ago. But things like that the government is putting more attention to, but the serious problems where the whole country is facing as a whole, do you think the government is putting its proper attention to those as well?
I think the government made a fundamental mistake in imposing that ban, because it was a question of finding who the wrongdoers are and punishing them. That's all. That's all that was required. But they didn't do that. If they had done that, no. But you must understand that there is a bright side of this whole exercise also, episode as well. Now it did not percolate into the other provinces. All this happened within a certain area only. It did not, and that's a good point. That is something that we did not pick up. I feel that is because so many have learned lessons. I feel, but there is always a possibility. I still feel that this incident had a political flavor. This incident definitely had a political flavor. Because the incident took place 7 days before. Nothing came up. It's only after the death that everything flared up. See, somebody has to be behind it. And that is exactly what happened. But you must understand that people are also under pressure due to so many reasons. Number one could be lack of money. Most of these people are unemployed. We must understand that. You go down a lane, there is an accident, hundreds rush into the scene. How is that? Youngsters, how do they come all of a sudden? Because they are unemployed. If they are employed somewhere else, they'll not be in a position to be present there. That's one thing that the government has to understand. Now these are areas that the government is not concentrating. Whenever you change something, you want the government to review the effects of that change every week, every month, every 3 months, every 6 months. But the government is not doing that. We said the government went ahead with this glyphosate issue. But did they check as to what was happening as far as the agriculture is concerned? No, they did not. So many experts said, for heaven's sake, don't do it. If you want, you do it in a staggered manner. That's the way to reach. But then they did not. They went ahead and said glyphosate is banned. Now all of a sudden, some people are coming and saying, no, glyphosate is not a major issue. Whereas the experts are saying right throughout, for heaven's sake, glyphosate is not a major issue. That's a mistake.
Is it like the asbestos ban that we brought in, we lifted? We initially said we don't want tabs, and then we are now saying that it's all under discussion. Where is consistent policy, Mr. Gunasekar?
We don't have a consistent policy because we don't rake up the views of the experts in this country. The specialists in this country are ignored. That is number one. That's crucial. Huh? That is where the government is faltering. If the government listens to the experts, it doesn't mean that you have to always listen to the experts, but get their views. Now, take the simple example of glyphosate. How many experts in the field of agriculture, professors, who are saying, and mind you, they have written to the president, the prime minister, the agriculture minister, for heaven's sake, don't go ahead with this. This is doom for this country. But they did not listen to that. You don't listen to experts, you are in serious trouble.
Professor Vijay Singh, we've heard a lot of discussion and concern over who should be appointed as the Minister of Law and Order. Obviously in the wake of the situation we saw in the Hill Country. Now, how far is it important? Is the individual the driving factor behind law enforcement, or is it the law enforcement agencies? How important is the person holding that portfolio?
Well, I think you should have a system where the agencies function effectively on their own. But when you have a crisis point, I think you need someone who has both vision and trust to set things right. Now, I think part of the problem with this whole law and order ministry business is it also turned into a sort of political football. You know, it started by being Marapana, then he was, I'm not even sure whether there's someone before Marapana, but it started by him having to give up because he wasn't taking revenge quickly enough. Then what does Ranil do? He appoints his pal Sagala Ratnayaka, who really is not fit to be a minister. He's a nice boy, but he's not fit to be a minister. So he becomes Minister of Law and Order, and then everyone thinks that Ranil is running the show. Then what happens? Sagala has to go. And then they start putting forward Sarath Fonseca, who was, you know, we talked about revenge earlier, who's eaten up with a passion for revenge. And that was his raison d'etre. Now maybe he would satisfy those who want people, you know, jail, but he would have made it so obvious that it was for revenge. You know, that I think it would have been a disaster. So I think the President Sirisena was right to say no. That's another instance in which he asserted himself. And from all I know, Ranjit Madhavan Bandara, I've only met him once, in fact, in this very room. And I found him a very civilized person. And I think he's moderate. He's not a threat to anyone. He's not revengeful at all. And I think he would probably do a good job. But again, one wonders whether he was appointed because Ranil Wickremesinghe suddenly realized that this was a potential rival, that within the UNP, people who wanted to get rid of Ranil and realized that neither Sajit nor Karu was willing to take the plunge, was looking for someone who's a very loyal member of the party. And there was talk that Ranjit Madhavan Bandara might be this, so Ranil may have quickly, you know, avoided the issue by appointing him. On the other hand, I don't know whether Ranil didn't recommend me and President Sirisena actually picked somebody who would probably make an ideal Prime Minister now. Because in fact what Sirisena should do, I take Gomindasari's point, that he's on his way out, but how can he establish that the country was not wrong to elect him? It is by saying, look, I have 1.5 years more, let's clean up the whole act by having a caretaker Prime Minister and a caretaker government. Make sure it's someone who will not be opposed by others, but I don't want a large majority in Parliament. I just want to make sure that there's no vote of no confidence. And I'll do what I promised, 30 ministers, efficient, able, and I'll tell everyone that is all I'm appointing. If you want, keep voting no confidence, try and have a majority, but since you're not prepared to dissolve Parliament, you can dissolve Parliament before 4.5 years if a majority votes. But they never will. But they never will.
It has to be
they will never do it. They'll never think of it. Exactly. So it will never happen. So you're stuck with this Parliament. So let Sirisena say, I just want a government that will take tough decisions, knowing that all of us will go back in 18 months. If he does that, actually, they may.
Ms. Dashri, what is your take on this, on the portfolio itself?
That I agree with Rani, my friend, but I do. Because
finally.
Not finally, but I hope I can do it again and again. Now, Shamil, yes. I think that is correct. Because what happened was, the law and order minister was Fonseca. Now Fonseca, remember, was a defeated candidate. He was defeated by Mahinda Rajapaksa, and there were even allegations that he was conspiring. I do not know the correctness of it, to overthrow a government. I don't know. But here was a man whom they thought was fine to be the leader, to be the law and order minister. Sirisena quite rightly accepted the majority view, I think, that was prevailing in the country, and didn't appoint him. I quite agree Mr. Sirisena has just 2 years. He should keep to his earlier promise of, I'm a one-term president, and clean corruption. He'll be rewarded. He'll be remembered for life. That is what my friend suggested, and that is exactly what he should do, not anything else.
Yes.
But completely wipe out corruption, go against other people who went, including his own people whom he appointed. If there's any sign of corruption, go after them. He'll be remembered.
Yes, I have a different view altogether, I must say this, with all my years of experience. When you want subjects like finance, trade, industry, you need experts. But law and order, you need a man who brings fear. That's very essential. Because at this juncture, the country is rampant, riddled with so many wrongdoings.
Who do you suggest should be?
I mean, I don't have to mention names, no. I said a person who brings fear.
So you don't think Ranil Wickremesinghe or Ranjit Bandara can instill that fear?
No.
So who is it going to be?
Surely, I mean, it's good as...
The best name at the moment is Gotabaya Rajapaksa, but he may never get chance because his brother may not want him there.
Gotabaya Rajapaksa has a dual citizenship, unfortunately.
I know, unfortunately, many disqualifications. But if you ask me who is the best man, whom people have confidence as a cleaner, a doer.
They don't want him to get rid of their dual citizenship.
There is trouble. He should get rid of it, and he should get rid of some of his poor advisors whose records are no good.
Vijay Singh,
just a second. I just want to get Mr. Rohan Maskorala's view as well. Now you have two individuals saying that Sarath Fonseca should not be the Minister of Law and Order because there'll be vengeance. But you have an individual who is not mentioning names, but is trying to incline that an individual who can bring or instill fear in someone's life should be the Minister of Law and Order. Now you as an individual who represents the citizenry at large, I know you're just an individual, Rohan, but in your opinion, we need action. We have our life should be fueled and infused with action. So who do you suggest should be the Minister of Law and Order?
Well, as I said, discipline of this country has gone for a 6. So we need discipline. If Gomin says Gotabaya is the person, then Sarath Fonseca is equally good because both of them fought the war together. So they were both disciplined in finishing the war. So I don't want to judge A and B, but both were disciplinarians in their field and delivered. So if Sarath Fonseca is in government, why not try him for the next?
Professor Vijay Singh, with all of this, what's going to happen to the no confidence motion against the Prime Minister?
Well, I think it's still going to come forward as far as I can make out, because there are many people in the UNP who realize that if they don't change him, the UNP, to use Dominda Asiri's phrase, I think he used it 22 times today, will be dead ducks. So I think the UNP itself will realize that the only way they can revive themselves is by changing Ranil Wickremesinghe. And I think enough people in the party have realized that. I think they should have someone who he won't fear. You know, I don't want someone to take revenge on him. So I think it would be best to have a very moderate person.
If Ranil Wickremesinghe steps down from the party leadership position, does that imply that he has to also step down from the Prime Minister position?
Well, it depends on what you mean by step down from the party leadership. If he loses, you know, I hate this word. I really got very upset when Kesara said he wants someone to instill fear. You know, I thought one of the points of the change last time was people said, you know, the last count was instilling fear. And I think it's quite disgraceful, Kesara, to actually say you want someone who instill fear. Discipline is a different one. But having said that, I think Ranil Wickremesinghe also operates in terms of fear. There are people who fear he'll take revenge in the party. And he is pretty good at revenge. You don't have to be violent to be revengeful. Take poor Buddhika Pathirana, popular politician in the country, and shut into outer darkness.
Complete darkness.
So I think you have to realize that Ranil is also quite... But if he does give up the leadership of the party seriously and the UNP is in other hands, I think it'll be 2 minutes before he's got rid of from the Prime Minister.
Mr. Gurusekar, you can respond to...
I think he took me
Yeah.
all wrong.
Yeah.
What I said, fear is against wrongdoers, are for the wrongdoers, not for the average man. The wrongdoers fear him. That is what we want, because look at the situation with regard to drugs coming into this country. All these things must stop. And the only person, I agree, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, but the other person is the person whom you mentioned.
Who is that?
Field Marshal.
Like Lord Voldemort, no?
Shamil, I think there's only one way to get rid of Ranil Wickremesinghe. It's the UNP. If the UNP parliamentarians know that with Ranil they are not going to get returned, their chances of coming back to parliament and enjoying the parliamentary perks and benefits are over, they will get rid of.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your thoughts in the first, second and third and fourth rounds. We're now going for a short commercial break. When we come back, it's a final round. We're talking about political climate in Sri Lanka right here on Face the Nation. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. I now move on to Professor Rajiv Vijay, a former member of United People's Freedom Alliance, who's been quite disciplined today. So I start off the final round with you, Professor. Usually when you're on the show, I always have to keep on reminding you that whatever statements that you're making is solely yours. However, today you've been quite disciplined, and thank you very much for your presence on the show tonight. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show as the former leader of the Liberal Party as well. What is the future for Sri Lanka, Professor, really? Where are we really heading? 2 years from now, we know there will be a presidential election as well as a parliamentary election as well. Where do we really stand in this equation? We have a provincial council election that's coming up in a few months from now. What can we really expect in the future?
Well, don't forget that nothing in this country is predictable. Postponement of elections has become, a vice that this government is extremely adept at playing. And I think we'd finally had the election and lost so badly that they'll use every trick in terms of postpone them. The first salvos have already been fired, as you know. Rauf Hakim has attacked the report of the Delimitation Commission. And I'm sure every trick will be used to postpone. And as you know, the D-date is 18 months from now. You can't postpone the presidential election. I think that I would agree with someone like Rohan that anyone who has kids will have to start thinking of exit routes. They're already doing this. And I think it's tragic. This country had so much promise in 2009 after Mahinda Rajapaksa won the war. But I'm afraid he just didn't move quickly enough on the piece. He handed things over to incompetent people, or rather people who didn't care enough. Maithripala Sirisena came in with a lot of promise. He handed things over to one man and of course one woman who still lurks in Attanakal and managed to lose that seat also. I mean, she actually did what Paul Pereira couldn't do with all his thuggery. You remember the rate at which Paul Pereira won the referendum. Chandrika Kumaratunga lost Attanakal to Mahinda Rajapaksa by an even more massive majority. She was sitting in the Valau and Sirisena was trying to keep her quiet, but she was pronouncing. So that type of thing has made it very clear that they are dead ducks. But Sirisena still has a chance to revive himself. And I go back to this point. Pick a decent Prime Minister, have a caretaker government with no ambitions to continue forever and ever. And I think one of you pointed out that Sri Lanka people want to continue forever and ever. And just try and do things in 1 year. 1 year is a long time. You can set this country to rights very, very quickly if you're not thinking about the next election all the time. So I hope Sirisena will learn the lesson of the last election and think, how can I justify the vote that I got in 2015? He can do it because he's basically a decent man.
Thank you very much, Professor Rajiv Vijay Singh, a former member of Parliament, United People's Freedom Alliance. I now move my attention to Mr. Kesaralal Gunasekara, a former member of Parliament of the People's Alliance, also was the former Deputy Mayor of the Devali Mount Municipal Council as well. Do we have any promise, Mr. Gunasekara? We have an election that's going to come up in a few months from now. The government certainly has to get its act together if they have to at least formidably look at the next election afresh and start gaining some votes. Where do we stand now at this current juncture?
This is exactly what I said earlier, that the government will have to sit back and do a deep study as to what went wrong and correct those things over a short period. It can be done. It can be done. Now the farmers issue, fertilizer, these are issues that can be solved within a matter of months. These are not big issues. Cost of living has to be looked into. Somebody has to go into this aspect and see. And then forget about the provincial elections, because your target has to be the next presidential and the general elections. Forget about the provincial council, because if you try to concentrate on the provincial council, you're losing the main two elections, that is presidential and general elections.
You're a Sri Lanka Freedom Party member.
Pardon?
You're a SLF peer, in other words, Mr. Gunasekara. One of the worries that Mr. Dayasri pointed out was, is President Sirisena going to contest another term in office? Now, as an SLF peer, you may have more insight to this. So, 2020 presidential election, who are the candidates we are really looking at from the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna? I know you don't have a magic ball in front of you to predict the future, but do you have any indication as to who?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, at the moment, maybe President Sirisena might want to come back. Maybe. As far as the UMP, serious problem. They don't have anybody. Then, with regard to Podujana Peramuna, it's the same. They also don't have anybody.
So we are at a deadlock.
Deadlock. As Mr. Dayasri said, who knows, somebody might turn up.
Somebody may
turn up.
Is that someone also going to rob the country, or is that someone going to do justice to the country?
We have to keep trying.
We have to wait and see.
We have to keep trying. That's all that we can do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kesarao Gunasekara, former Member of Parliament of the People's Alliance. It's always nice to have you on the show as well.
Thank you.
Some amazing insight.
It's a pleasure to do a program with you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gunasekara. It's always a pleasure to have you on board, and individuals like you make the program very rich with a dialogue as well as some constructive criticism for the government to move forward. I now move my attention to our very vocal senior attorney at law, Mr. Govind Dayasri. Mr. Dayasri, don't use the word dead ducks, because we've used it 25 times. You've used it 22 times according to Professor Ajay Vijayasinghe. He used it 3 times in his last speech. So let's start off thinking about a little bit of optimism for Sri Lanka.
I think there's one other word that has been used even more. What I said earlier, I won't say who says it. Right? Now, I think it's a very simple scenario. If Ranil Wickremesinghe quits, and he would be the first, he should quit, and I think he's inclined to quit. Remember, he didn't contest 2 elections because he didn't think he'll win. So if he does quit, then the SLP will have to start thinking whether Mahinda Rajapaksa is a good candidate. Because the one candidate Mahinda Rajapaksa will not oppose, whom he desires to have as his opponent, is Ranil Wickremesinghe. So if Ranil Wickremesinghe goes, I think Mahinda Rajapaksa will have to go, or think of going, or the SLP might have to think afresh if the UNP puts out a new, young, dynamic, able candidate. So there is the scenery, and within that scenery, I think Sirisena has the best chance not to win, not to contest, but he can do a lot of good for the country if he behaves like he did in the bond scam, as he behaved in some other matters where he acts totally presidential, objectively. He can do something for the country, and that is the need of the hour. Somebody has to do, as Rajiv said, I agree with him. President Sirisena should now forget running another election. His stooges, sycophants will have to go. That's good for the country. But we need a new people, new team, let them emerge. I think we will have to try, as my friend Kesara said, but I think one day we are going to get that right person, because Sri Lankans were never losers. Remember, we are the only country that has been effectively able to totally eliminate terrorism and make it a good country. But what happened? The people, I blame the people, they went overboard. They pressed Mahinda Rajapaksa to such a point he became corrupt. So therefore I think the country's future is in new hands. We got to get rid of all the present politicians, sweep them off the board. Remember, they were there for 42 years, 2 generations. But one thing very sad, the younger generation is voting just like their parents. They are not innovative, they are not creating, they are not looking at new people. They are thinking of leaving the country, as my friend says.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Senior Attorney at Law, Govind Dayasri. Nice to have you on the show as well, Mr. Dayasri, after a lapse of many months to get your insight on the show. I now move my attention to Rohan Maskorala, CEO of the Shippers Academy of Colombo. Pessimism seems like the order of the day for you, Rohan, because the first time you were on this very show, I saw a lot of optimism. You said about the United Arab Emirates, how they've been able to move forward as a nation. There was so much of optimism in you as far as Sri Lanka was concerned, but what happened to you during the last 1.5 years? Why so much of pessimism? And you may say that you are just being realistic, but why so much?
Well, I am not a frog in a well. I travel the world. I see what's happening out there. I see what's changing the world in terms of technology, the developments in other countries. When you see that, you feel sorry for our people. And I feel a hypocrite when you are living in this country that a small percentage of people who have a luxury life and rest of the people are continuously being dragged along with this political system. And as I said, I have been very positive. I wanted this country to be a maritime hub, a logistics hub. I still see it possible. I have hope. But the problem is that hope is diminishing every day because of these systems we have. I agree that we need a new leadership in the country, new young leadership, and that cannot be created if the people don't understand. There's a responsibility of this country's people to elect new educated people into the parliament of this country. If the 90 to 100 MPs in the parliament have failed ordinary level, this country is not going to go anywhere beyond this point. Even the next 10 years I can predict, if that kind of people come into the parliament. So the people have a great responsibility to put things right. And that's why I said the horizon doesn't show that positiveness over the next 2 years with this same bunch of people in the electoral system coming up and again for contesting, which is, they are not going to change. During my young days, my boss said, don't try to change people who are 45 years or above. They're not going to change. They are fixed in their attitudes. They're not. So country needs people who have new ideas, new ways of thinking, and those people are not allowed to come into the system. So therefore you cannot expect me to be so positive as I was 2 years or 3 years back. When the systems change, we hoped for good governance. That good governance has been not coming as we expected. So that's why I said I am a bit not so positive as I was two years back when I came to your studios.
Thank you very much, Rohan Maskorala, CEO of the Shippers Academy of Colombo. Thank you very much again, Mr. Kesaral, the former Member of Parliament, People's Alliance, as well as the former Deputy Mayor of the Colombo Dehivala Municipal Council. Always a pleasure to have you on board today. As I always say, thank you very much, Professor Rajiv Vijay Singha, for being very disciplined today and agreeing with your fellow panelists on most occasions and still voicing your opinion about what is right and what you stand truthful for. Thank you very much for joining us this evening on the show. Thank you very much, Attorney at Law, Mr. Govind Dayasri. I like you going against the views of your fellow panelists, but then again today you agreed on most factors that was brought forward by Professor Vijay Singh. Why is that?
That's because I helped you to maintain some kind of discipline.
Thank you very much, Mr. Govind Dayasri, for joining us this evening. It's always a pleasure to have you on board as always. Your wealth of information, knowledge is always important on a show like this. Thank you very much, Rohan Maskorala, CEO of the Shippers Academy of Colombo. It's always a pleasure to have you on board.
Thank you for inviting me.
As you say, you travel around, and that knowledge that you bring to the table is very important for a country like Sri Lanka. Thank you very much, Charita Fernando, for joining us this evening. and our very young Chaturanga for joining us this evening on the show. And all the very best. I hope and pray that you have a wonderful future and great things to look forward from you as a very young assistant manager of news. I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do, without further ado. The past cannot be changed, and that is a fact. However, the future is yet in your power. Don't forget that. Take care and good night.